אני לא אכביר במילים. We're very happy to introduce Dr. אוברי גריי to talk to you today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is just a very quick visit that I'm making to Israel. I arrived on Monday, I'm leaving on Friday, but it's proving to be a very busy trip. I'm really delighted that there are so many people who want to hear about the ways that technology may soon bring aging under really comprehensive medical control. And I'm amazed at how many people there are in this little room. I apologize to everybody who doesn't have a seat. I hope that all of you can hear me, even if some of you can't see me. And also I hope that you can see the screen. I'm standing over here so that I don't get in the way of it. I have been asked to speak for, about an hour, including questions. And I always find that when I speak to audiences like this, especially in a bar, that it's good if I can have a lot of questions. So I will try not to speak for more than about 40 minutes and then leave plenty of time for you to tell me what's wrong with everything I said. This is the big phrase that you are going to be hearing a lot about over the next few years, rejuvenation biotechnology. You all know what biotechnology is, the application of biology to humanity one way or another. It's medicine, it's environmental decontamination, it's all many things. Rejuvenation means turning back the clock of aging, making people biologically younger than they were before. So it means not just slowing down the process of aging, but actually reversing it. And the reason why the ideas I'm going to be telling you about tonight are so new and so controversial is because it is not at all obvious that we could ever do this. Most people think, well, let's not even think about turning back the clock until we can slow it down, because surely turning it back is far, far more difficult than slowing it down. But it turns out that no, that's not true. That repairing the damage of aging, rejuvenation, is going to be easier. And I will tell you why, of course. So, first of all, let's talk about the problem. Now, this is a graph from the USA. And it's a little bit different in different countries, but it's more or less the same. The number of people over the age of 65 is going up. In this particular graph, we have going from 1950 out to a projection of 2050, and the proportion of the population in the US, which is over the age of 65, goes up from about 8% to about 22%. That's a really big increase. And all of you probably know that across the whole world, this is causing big economic problems and big social problems because we need to pay the pensions to these people and so on. But we must remember that really this is a success story. We should celebrate the fact that there are more people who are older, because what it means is that there are not so many people dying young, dying of infections when they are children or when they are giving birth, things like that. So yes, we have a problem because of the things that happen to people when they get old, but it's a problem that we would like to have. It's a problem that we have created as a result of solving an even more bad problem. So if we think about what that means economically, of course it all comes down to health care. Again, I am showing you statistics here from the USA, but it's not very different in any other developed nation. The red line is the growth of the US economy, the simple size of the GDP, the gross domestic product. It's gone up by a big factor between 1960 and 2010. The blue line is the growth of medical care, the amount of money that is spent on medicine in the USA. And, of course, a large majority of that medicine is spent on diseases and disabilities of old age. And so this doesn't look too serious if you look at it like this, but it looks much more serious if you ask what proportion of the economy is spent on medicine. That's the green line. The green line is the red line divided by the blue line. As you can see, it goes up from about 5% to about 18%, and that's just in 50 years. That's an enormous increase. And that's why politicians and other people are so scared of the problem of aging. But, as I said, it's a problem that we do not want to undo by going back to having lots of people dying at the age of 1 or at the age of 21. We are pleased that people are living a long time. What we want to do now is make people live a long time in a healthy state. We want to solve the problems that have emerged as a result of the problems that we have solved. So, first of all, let us ask ourselves why we have been so much less successful against the diseases of old age than we have against infectious diseases. Of course, there are still some infectious diseases that are real problems, especially HIV. But there are many infectious diseases that were the major killers 100 or 200 years ago, which are now almost unknown in the developed world. So, what's the difference? Well, in order to answer that question, I'm going to step back one step and ask about what aging really is. You really need to think about that and have a good understanding of it in order to be able to think about how to do anything about aging. So this is a definition of aging. There are lots of other definitions of aging out there, but most of them are actually useless. If anything, they do more harm than good because they confuse people and they do not help us to arrange our thinking to help us to understand how we might develop medicine against aging. This definition is very good in that way. First of all, it's a mechanistic definition. It says how aging happens as well as what it is. Aging is a side effect of being alive in the first place. That's all it is. That's all it is. The human body is a machine, and as it works, it does many good things, but it does damage to itself. And that damage accumulates over time, and eventually there is too much damage for the body to tolerate, and this body starts to work less well. Diseases and disabilities happen, and eventually the body stops working at all, and we die. That's all aging is. It's really, really simple. So, let us now think about the relationship between aging and the diseases of old age. What I want to emphasize to you is that there is no distinction between those two things. If we try to define a difference, some things are aging and some other things are age-related disease, then we cannot find a biologically correct way to do that. Because the diseases of old age are parts of aging. They are simply aspects of the later stages of this lifelong accumulation of damage. So, of course, as I told you already, they are very widespread now, and they cost an enormous amount, but they are not like normal diseases. Some people might, if they are unlucky, they might get tuberculosis. Some people, if they are lucky, will not get it. But everybody will get Alzheimer's disease unless they die of something else beforehand. Because the longer you live, the higher your risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. It's just a side effect of accumulation of damage that happens as a result of being alive. That means that they are not medically curable in the strict sense of the word cure. What do I mean by the strict sense? I mean that you cannot develop a treatment that can be applied once to somebody who has Alzheimer's disease and they will never get it again in the way that you could for tuberculosis until they are reinfected or something. The reason you can't do that is because Alzheimer's disease is part of aging. If you were to cure it, you would have to cure being alive in the first place, which would rather defeat the object. So let's not do that. Let's do something else. Because the fact is, aging is a medical problem. It's bad for you. It's really bad for you. It kills people. It kills more than 2/3 of all people worldwide. It's responsible for 90% of all deaths within the developed world. And it is medically preventable, but we need to do it in a different way than the way that we use to address infectious diseases. This is another way of saying the same thing. You can see I really want you to get this because it's absolutely fundamental. Most people think about diseases like this. They think that there are infections like these, and there are genetic diseases that you inherit because of mistakes in your genome. And then there are diseases of old age that everybody gets. Some people get them a little later than others. And then, completely separate from that, there is aging. That's what most people think. They think that these not very well-defined things, like frailty, so sarcopenia, that means the loss of muscle. Immunosenescence means decline in the function of the immune system. People think of these things as completely different from disease. And therefore, they think about these diseases, even though they are related, they happen in old age, they think about them as being rather like these. But actually the correct way to think is this way. The black line should be here. These are diseases, and we can tackle them in the ways that we try to tackle them. But these are not. These are simply the parts of aging that we have given names to. That's all it is. These are the ones that we choose to call diseases. It means nothing biologically. If we start thinking about the diseases of old age in that way, everything becomes much clearer. Here is the definition of aging that I told you, written in just 3 words. Metabolism is the word that biologists use to describe the way the body normally works. It's simply the network of processes that go on that keep us alive from one day to the next. And as I mentioned, it creates damage throughout life, even starting before we're born. But for a long time, that damage is harmless because the body is set up to tolerate quite a lot of damage. Eventually, though, there is too much damage and we get the diseases of old age. So everything that exists today in hospitals, in the clinic, in the medical industry, to combat the diseases of old age is this, geriatric medicine. And geriatric medicine is built on the idea of completely ignoring everything I've told you so far. Of pretending that aging is that the diseases of old age are just regular diseases. And you can attack the symptoms and bash away at them and eliminate them from the body. It's obvious that that's never going to work, because these diseases are the result of this damage which is still accumulating, so any version of geriatric medicine is always going to become less effective as time goes on, as the damage continues to accumulate. Why do people do this? Why do people do it? Well, there's a phrase in English which you have probably heard. It says, when the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So in other words, they haven't figured out how to do anything except this, so they do it even if it's not going to work. It's better than nothing, but it's only a teeny tiny bit better than nothing, and that's how it always will be. Now, I am not the first person to notice this. For nearly a century, people have been saying more or less what I've just told you, and they have said, therefore we must actually try to eliminate aging by intervening at an earlier stage in this chain of events. And that's where the gerontology approach comes from. The gerontology approach says, well, okay, maybe we should try to clean up our metabolism. We should try to figure out how to make metabolism create less damage, create damage more slowly than it normally does. That would be wonderful. It would postpone the age at which the damage reaches the age where it's bad for you. But there's a big problem. In fact, there are 2 big problems. The first problem is that if you slow down the rate at which damage is being created, but you don't do anything about the damage that is already there, then people who are already in middle age or older, they have a lot of damage, then they're not going to benefit very much. It's only if you have the good fortune to be young when the therapies come along, so you can have them all your life, that you will have a substantial benefit. So that's bad news. But it's worse than that. The real problem with this approach, and why it has not led to any medical advances yet, is complexity. We all know that the pathologies of old age are complicated, that many things go wrong with you when you are older. Here's a list of them. You're not supposed to be able to read it. All right? But what some people forget, especially non-biologists tend to forget, is that metabolism is not exactly very simple either. This is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how metabolism really works, about how the body works. And you can see the problem. If the goal is to tweak this, to modify it so that it does less of the thing we don't want it to do, the creation of damage, but otherwise we don't change anything, you know, it carries on doing all the good things we need it to do, there's no way we're going to do that. We're bound to do more harm than good if we change this system. And that's really why we've got nowhere with this. That's, of course, an understatement of the problem. The problem is not so much that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works. The real problem is that this is a simplified diagram of a small subset of what we know about how the body works, which is completely dwarfed, any biologist will tell you this, completely dwarfed by the astronomical amount that we don't know about how the body works. And that's even ignoring all the stuff that we don't even know that we don't know. So it's never going to happen. I mean, well, I'm not saying never. Progress is being made in developing good systems biology approaches to trying to understand these ridiculously complex systems. But I'm sure that it won't actually deliver really meaningful results against aging for many years to come. Well, that's all very miserable, so you might think, what am I doing here? Why is it so exciting to have people like me visiting and giving lectures? Well, the answer is that there is an alternative, a third way to fix aging. And it all comes from the way that we fix aging in simple man-made machines, like cars. So here's a car that's about 100 years old. And there are not many of them around, but they exist. And you might ask, how? How come is it that we have cars that are 100 years old? The reason is not because they were designed that way. This car was probably designed to last only 10 or 20 years. The only reason it's lasted so long is because the people who own it fell in love with it, and they have done a lot of maintenance on it. They have done really comprehensive maintenance on this car every so often, and that keeps it going. If you only do the amount of maintenance on your car that the law tells you to, then it doesn't last, and it falls apart after 20 years and you get a new one. And that's what most people do. But if for whatever reason you choose to do much more maintenance, then this is the result. Maintenance works, it really works, to extend the healthy longevity of a machine far beyond how long it was designed to last. So naturally that says maybe the same general idea would work for this much more complicated machine that we call the human body. What that means, going back to my earlier diagram, is this, that there is a third approach. I'm going to call it the maintenance approach. You could call it the engineering approach or the rejuvenation approach or anything like that. It says, let's not try to slow down this process where metabolism creates damage, and let's also not try to slow down this process where damage creates pathology. Instead, let us try to separate those two processes from each other by going in the middle and repairing damage every so often, so that even though it's being created, it doesn't reach the pathogenic threshold. That's the simple idea. And it seems to be pretty promising. The first reason it's promising is simply that it avoids the problems I described for the other two approaches. You don't have this accumulating problem behind damage. If you can fix damage, you're done. But also, you're not trying to interfere in this really complicated network of processes. You're just targeting the products of that process. So that's really handy. That's really good news. But, of course, in order to make it really good news, we have to go much further. So far, I've been very abstract and theoretical in what I've said. It's time to get onto real biology. And I won't get too technical, of course, because I imagine that most of you are not biologists. But still, I'll tell you a little bit about what ideas I put forward maybe 15 years ago now, and what they amount to and what we're doing to make them true. The first piece of really good news is that we were able to break down the problem of aging, the nature of damage, into a manageable number of sub-problems, just 7 sub-problems. Each of these things that I've listed here is something that changes in the body over time, throughout life, and it changes in a slightly different way in different organs, in different tissues, but basically it's the same thing wherever it happens. And it seems that this is a complete classification. In other words, all of the phenomena that qualify as damage, as intermediates, as things that are caused as side effects of being alive, and that eventually contribute to the ill health of old age, they come under one or other of these categories. So if we look at them, we can see that they are really, concrete things. Cell loss, what is that? That means cells dying and not being automatically replaced by the division of other cells. That's all it is. And it turns out that that happens quite a bit throughout life in various ways, and it leads in a very clear way to certain of the diseases of old age. Parkinson's disease is one good example, which is almost entirely caused by cell loss. There's one particular part of the brain where neurons, brain cells, die and they're not replaced, and in those of us who are unlucky, so those neurons are dying more rapidly than normal, then those people get Parkinson's disease. I could go down this list. I think rather than doing that now, I will come back to any of this if anyone wants questions. I'm going to talk about one of these things in more detail. But all I really want you to notice is that all of these things are very clear, concrete, biological phenomena. They are not just abstract things, they are real. Now, the first question you may have is, how can I be so confident that this is a full, comprehensive classification, that we will not discover number 8 and number 9? Well, one way we can say that is by just doing biology. We can say, well, okay, where in the body would damage accumulate? It's got to be in long-lived structures, things that are not simply destroyed and recycled all the time, because if you recycle a damaged thing, then you are recycling the damage as well, you're removing the damage. And you can get this list in that way quite easily. But there's a second way of looking at this, which gives us very good confidence that it's a complete classification, which is, it's been the same list for more than 30 years. All of these things have been major topics of discussion and research within the biology of aging since at least the early 1980s. And, you would have thought that we would have discovered new things by now if there were anything new to discover. Now, the one objection to that argument would be, well, okay, maybe we weren't really trying to find a classification before, and that's fair enough. But the fact is, I came along more than 10 years ago and gave this classification, and I've been challenging my colleagues to come along and say, okay, we've missed this, we've missed that, and I seem to be getting away with it. Nobody seems to be doing so. Nobody seems to be coming up with anything that doesn't fall into these categories. So that's really good news. But we need a couple of other things in order to really believe that this is a promising approach. The first thing we need to do is to understand reasonably well how these various types of damage translate into the diseases and disabilities of old age. We don't need to understand that thing completely, we just need to believe that it's comprehensive and get a fairly good understanding in order that people who are still in the mindset of thinking that all that matters is diseases will nevertheless understand that it makes sense to tackle this damage that comes before the diseases. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on that. First of all, let's talk about cancer. Cancer is a really simple case. Cancer is pretty much defined as this thing here, cells which divide when they're not supposed to. Okay? That's all cancer is. So that's nice and simple. We know what cancer is in terms of damage. But if we think about the heart, of course, heart disease is the #1 killer in the Western world, then things are much more complicated. There are lots of different things that go wrong with the heart as we get older. And it turns out that they are caused by different types of damage. So atherosclerosis, the accumulation of fatty material in the major arteries, which causes heart attacks and strokes, that is an example of this thing here, molecular waste products inside cells. What that means is simply things that the cell makes as a normal byproduct of its behavior, but which the cell does not know how to destroy or to get rid of, to export. And so those things just accumulate. And for a long time, that's harmless. You know, your kitchen works just as well when the garbage can is full as it does when it's empty. But it doesn't work so well if the garbage can is already full and you carry on not taking the garbage out. Eventually the kitchen goes downhill. It's exactly the same for the cells in the artery. But there are other ways in which the heart goes wrong. One thing is arteriosclerosis. That means stiffening of the arteries. Arteries becoming less elastic. It's a completely different thing from atherosclerosis, but it also happens increasingly with age, and it's caused by this bottom thing here. Chemical bonds happening, linkages happening between proteins in the lattice that holds our cells together and gives our arteries and other tissues elasticity. This is something that we need to fix in order to stop high blood pressure from happening, with all the consequences that it has, like kidney failure and so on. Something that's much more recent as a discovery and also as something that people really care about in aging is a disease called senile cardiac amyloidosis. You probably haven't heard of that because it's really rare, but it turns out that it's really, really common in the extreme elderly, people over 100 years old. It's a major killer in the extreme elderly. And it's an example of this thing here, molecular waste products accumulating not inside cells, but in the spaces between cells. So we need to fix that too. Then finally, sometimes people's hearts just stop, not because of anything that's really gone wrong in terms of the heart itself, but because the brain is ceasing to tell the heart what to do, to carry on beating. That happens because of cell loss. It turns out that there are cells in the heart called pacemaker cells, which are responsible for directing the beating of the heart, and those cells die and they are not adequately replaced during life. Eventually, when we have too few of them, sometimes the heart will just stop because it will not be understanding that it needs to carry on beating. So, I spent a little time on that because I wanted you to understand that sometimes the relationship between damage and pathology is really complicated. But just because it's complicated doesn't mean we don't understand it, doesn't mean we cannot maintain our confidence that if we attack damage, then we will be preempting pathology. Another example is Alzheimer's disease. In Alzheimer's, we have molecular waste products inside the cell, they're called tangles. We also have molecular waste products outside the cell, they're called plaques. And we have cell loss. We have neurons dying and not being progressively automatically replaced. And all of those things contribute, or we believe they do, to the pathology of Alzheimer's. Incidentally, I should talk about that a little bit, because some people say that actually plaques don't matter at all in Alzheimer's. So what? The fact is, they might matter because young people don't have plaques and they don't have Alzheimer's. So they're evidently not very good for us, except possibly as an adaptation to other things that are changing, like tangles. But that still means that whichever of these things are really driving Alzheimer's, maybe they all are, maybe only some of them are, it's still going to work to fix all of them. If we fix some things that we didn't need to fix, so what? We haven't done any harm. Whereas if we don't fix something we do need to fix, then we're going to look a bit silly. So I say let's fix everything that might matter. And that's the situation with Alzheimer's. Frailty, or general decline. It's a very poorly defined concept even. And it comes down to all of these things. All of the, perhaps not cancer, perhaps not division-obsessed cells, but all of these things are fundamentally degenerative. They stop the body from working so well. And of course we know plenty of specifics about how that happens, but the specifics don't really matter. We just know that we need to fix all of these things in order to fix this thing. So now, let's get on to the actual fixes. All I've done so far is explain that we understand quite a lot about the nature of the problem. I haven't talked about the solution yet. But luckily we can talk about the solution as well, in quite a lot of detail. There are various ways in which the maintenance approach can be actually implemented. Really, it comes down to these four possibilities: replacing things that have gone missing, removing things that we have too much of, repairing things that have got damaged but we don't want to replace or remove them, and reinforcing things, which basically means breaking the link between damage and pathology, making something that used to be a contributor to pathology no longer be so. And in each category we have a preferred approach that comes under one or other of those categories. If we go on to specifics, it's like this. And I'll start at the top. I won't have time to go through all of these things, but the first one is something that you all know about: stem cell therapy. Stem cell therapy is all about doing what the body is not succeeding in doing to repair the damage of cell loss. When a cell dies, the obvious thing for the body to do is to have another cell divide and maybe change its nature, what's called differentiate, to replace the cell that died. Sounds great. Sometimes the body doesn't do that. And what we're doing is develop what stem cell therapists, what stem cell researchers are doing is developing ways to put new cells into the body that will be able to divide and differentiate to replace the cells that went missing. We actually, in Sense Research Foundation, we don't do much in that area, in stem cell therapy. That's certainly not because we don't think it's important, it's vital. But it's because we're a small organization, we only spend about $4 million, $5 million a year, and our money is better spent. We make more of a difference concentrating on things that hardly anybody else understands the value of, whereas stem cell therapy, stem cell research is a really big field. There's plenty of it going on in Israel, I know. So, you know, we can leave it to other people. These other things are not the same at all. Pretty much all of them are at a much earlier stage of development, and for most people, they're at a too early stage. Either they are just too high risk, too difficult for academics to work on, or they're too long-term for the private sector to work on. So that's why Sense Research Foundation is a charity. We're a non-profit based in California, and we survive on philanthropy, on people giving us money to get this work done. And it's hard work getting that to happen, but it's easier than persuading the government to do stuff. Except maybe in Israel, and I'll come back to that later. So what's this all about? What do we actually want to achieve? Well, in the short term, what I want to achieve is a change in the attitude of the world, governments, industry, opinion formers, benefactors, everybody, to the nature of aging and the relationship between aging and the diseases of old age. I want people to understand what I told you at the beginning of the talk, that it makes no sense to distinguish aging from age-related diseases, that the treatment of aging is synonymous with preventative medicine for age-related ill health. Now, there are other people saying this, thank God. It hadn't been going on for long. For a long time, I was the only person saying this particularly loudly. But other people are beginning to say it now. However, I really am still quite pessimistic. I don't know how soon it's going to have any traction, because there are so many people who want to leave things the way they are, because that's where the money is, because that's where the government is, because that's where the public is. It's all this big logjam. In fact, I think I might have a picture of a logjam. Hang on, I'll come back to that. In the medium term, once we get that to happen, and once we start to develop these therapies, it's going to be about getting those therapies out there, actually developing a change to the way that medicine is delivered to the public, so that there is a focus on medicine that really works against the diseases and disabilities of old age. And that's going to happen. I think we've got a chance of that happening in the next 20 or 25 years. I'll talk more about time frames later on. In the long term, this is what we're talking about. Hands up anyone who knows someone with Alzheimer's disease. Raise your hand if you know someone with, lots of people, okay. Raise your hand if you know someone with cancer. Raise your hand if you know someone with heart disease. Raise your hand if you know someone with type 2 diabetes. Okay, now, raise your hand if you raise your hand. Anyone who raised their hand for any of the questions? No, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. Okay, that's most of you. That's most of you. That's how big a deal this is. It would be quite a good idea, I think you will agree, if nobody had any of those diseases. That's how we would have felt 150 or 200 years ago if the conversation had been about tuberculosis or diphtheria or the other major diseases that were killing most people back then. Can you really imagine the idea of going back to a situation where we had all of that death in infancy and so on? You know, that's what we need to. That's the way we need to be thinking. If we're not thinking that way, if we're not really trying to eliminate these diseases, then we're just being ageist. We're saying that the elderly don't matter very much. And I'm not ageist, and I bet you're not either if you think about it. So that's why this is so important. That's why I work on this. It's the world's most important problem. All right, so I said a little bit already about why we are a non-profit. In other words, why it needs a charity to be pursuing this work. It's too long-term for most of the commercial world. It's too high risk for the government. And so the end of the right-hand side of this has been cut off a little bit. I was trying to indicate which of these things are most important, most neglected by other people. But you can get the idea. Pretty much everything except stem cell therapy needs our help. This is the logjam I was talking about. Scientists, you know, some of them have their heart in the right place. They would like to get to work on the most important problems. But ultimately, they work on what they can get money to work on. That money mostly comes from the government and from industry, in fact more or less all of it, except philanthropy for people like us. And so, they are restricted to working on what is conventional. That's what I was saying. Why is the government so conservative? Why is industry so conservative? Why do they not innovate more, do more high-risk stuff? It's because they are beholden to these people. Ultimately, people in government have one goal in life. They want to get re-elected. And that means they don't like to spend taxpayers' money on things that the people think are a waste of money, think will never work or are a bad idea. It's the same in industry because industry had its own electorate, shareholders. So then we have to ask, how do these people form their opinions? The answer is they have television. And unfortunately, even though I get on television quite a lot, so do a lot of the more conservative people who are funded by government and industry. And they say very conservative things about what's possible and what's desirable. So they reinforce the pessimism of these people. And it's all a terrible logjam. Nothing really changes. The only way that it really can be changed at the moment is philanthropy. And that's why we created this charity. If we get in here and we provide money that is not dependent on these people, then these people can do the right things, and then they can talk about doing the right things and change the opinions of these people, and eventually that will change the policies of these people, and this will be easier all around. But it's a long, long process. It's going fairly well, though. This is our research advisory board, and all of these 25 people are extremely distinguished, famous scientists. We're very, very privileged to have these people willing to go out there publicly and endorse the things I've been telling you tonight. These are, let me give you a feel for how important these people are. This guy down here, William Hazeltine, he invented the term regenerative medicine. He is the father of regenerative medicine. This guy here, Tony Atala, he runs the biggest regenerative medicine institute in the world. Let's see, this lady here, Maria Blasco, she runs the organization that oversees almost all medical research funding in Spain. This lady here, Nadia Rosenthal, runs the largest regenerative medicine institute in the Southern Hemisphere. All of these people are that kind of stature. So this means that it's not possible to say that, the concept of repairing damage as a way of treating aging is just a silly idea that some crazy guy with a beard talks about all over the world. You can't say that anymore. We had that problem several years ago, but not anymore. So that's nice. And of course we do much more than that. We are constantly working to improve people's understanding of this. In the scientific community, we run conferences. This is a conference from last September. Where again we had really top people from all over the world talking about the work that's going on to bring this concept to fruition. So that's great. And of course it's not just for scientists. Non-scientists can come to these conferences too. We're running one in America in August. If any of you are going to be there, you should go to our website and find out about it. We are, of course, we need to demonstrate that we spend people's money responsibly. So we have to do all this nonsense of producing glossy brochures that show that our financial probity is very intact. This is our last year's annual report. But the main thing, all of that is great, the main thing that matters is we have to actually make progress in the lab. We have to actually move step by step forward towards making this a reality. And that's how people are really going to end up believing it. And the fact is, science takes a hell of a long time. So, for quite a while, we really didn't have any results to speak of that were very significant. But that's really changing now. I'm going to tell you in a moment about this top one, about how we're using enzymes from bacteria to cure atherosclerosis. Just last week or the week before, there was a paper published in this very prestigious journal, Journal of Biological Chemistry, talking about how a special type of antibody can get rid of the molecular garbage that causes this disease I mentioned earlier, senile cardiac amyloidosis. We're interested in making mitochondrial mutations harmless by putting backup copies in the nucleus that are much more protected, and they are modified in such a way that they still work, so that mutations in the mitochondrial DNA no longer matter. We're interested in combating cancer by eliminating telomerase, eliminating this enzyme that cancers need to activate in order to be immortal. And we just very recently had a very important result, which is not yet published, showing that in the blood, telomerase can be eliminated in mice. So we're doing a great deal of work, but it's slow and steady. I'm just going to spend the last part of my remarks, the last 5 minutes or so, talking in detail about one area of research that we do. If there are any biologists in the audience, this is the sort of thing you probably want to know. You want to know that this is not just talk. So it's always important to give a little bit of a background. So the way that we are working to get rid of waste products that the body does not naturally get rid of is by looking in the rest of nature, looking for other species that can destroy the molecules that we naturally cannot destroy. Turns out that usually bacteria are the right place to look. And the idea is that we find bacteria which have this capability, we find the genes and enzymes that they have which allow them to have this capability, and then we modify those genes and enzymes so that they work in human cells. So effectively we are expanding the range of things that the human cell can destroy. I'm going to show you the example of cardiovascular disease, of atherosclerosis, which is the #1 killer in the Western world. Everybody who works on atherosclerosis is agreed about the way that it progresses. It starts out with white blood cells in the artery wall, the walls of our major arteries, which are doing a very important job of cleaning up stuff that gets stuck there. And that stuff is mostly made of cholesterol. And they're very good at it. They can handle cholesterol perfectly. They reprocess it and export it out in a form that can be reused, and everything's glorious. Except that this cholesterol is not pure, it is contaminated. Some of the cholesterol is oxidized. It's modified in a way that makes it a different type of molecule that the white blood cells cannot process properly. And those white blood cells turn into this thing called a foam cell, which is a kind of undead cell that can't do much. The part of the cell that is most affected is this thing called the lysosome. It basically just gets inactivated by oxidized cholesterol so that it can't process normal cholesterol in the normal way. So then the question is, what can we do about that? If the white blood cell were able already to process oxidized cholesterol just as well as it can process normal cholesterol, this wouldn't happen. And that means atherosclerosis wouldn't happen, because everything ultimately comes from the foam cell. After you get a lot of these, more of these white blood cells come into the artery wall, and they suffer the same problem, so that the material just grows, and eventually it becomes this thing that we call an atherosclerotic plaque. Well, first of all, can we find any species that has the ability to break down this oxidized cholesterol? Answer is yes, it was pretty easy. We published, this is the first paper we ever published actually, back in 2008. We used some techniques that we took from bioremediation, a field that is normally involved in getting rid of pollutants in the environment. And we were particularly focusing on a particular type of oxidized cholesterol called 7-ketocholesterol, which is known to be the most important one. It's the most abundant and the most toxic. So it turned out to be easy. We just got a bunch of bacteria, we gave them this stuff, we didn't give them anything else to grow on, and most of them couldn't do bugger all with it, so they're just sitting there like lemons, nothing happened. But these other two had a great time, and after only 10 days the material's completely gone. This is what you want. Now, then what? We've got to find the genes and the enzymes. Turns out that's not too hard either. We did mass spectrometry. This is a technique where you can identify the breakdown products of a reaction, and from that you can infer what enzymatic process has occurred, and you can use bioinformatics to find candidate genes. That was pretty successful for us. We also did other things, differential expression analysis, looking for which genes the bacterium uses when it has this stuff and it doesn't use when it has similar molecules that we don't want to break down. All of that was nice and successful, so by around 2010, we had some candidate genes. Then came the hard part 3, which is to modify those genes so that they actually work in mammalian cells, in human cells. First thing you've got to do is make sure that the enzyme, when it is created, it goes to the right part of the cell. That's not too hard to do. This just shows that we can do it. This stain on the left is for the lysosome. This stain in the middle is for our engineered protein, and this just shows that there's plenty of overlap. So a lot of our protein is going to the lysosome. Good so far. But bacteria don't have lysosomes. Bacteria are really different from humans. And so we then had a lot of messing about to do to make the enzyme actually work when it was sent to the right place. But we finally did it. About a year ago we published this paper showing that we could take cells in culture and protect them using our engineered gene, when they were given this stuff. We put this 7-ketocholesterol into the medium, into the environment of these cells in culture, and if you have a completely insupportable amount of it, then all the cells die, whatever. But if you have a more modest concentration of this stuff, then in these middle ones, you can see that the right-hand column is higher than the others. That means that the cells are more viable, they live longer and more successfully if they have our engineered gene, compared to the situation if they have various negative controls. If they, for example, don't have the gene, or they have a different gene for a different enzyme, or they have the enzyme but it's not targeted to the lysosome, things like that. So this was a great breakthrough. We need to go further. This experiment was done using fibroblasts, which is a different type of cell, a cell that's easy to work with in culture, but it's not the relevant type of cell for atherosclerosis. So we're currently getting this to work in macrophages, the type of white blood cell that really matters for this. And once we've got that going, we'll move to mouse models of cardiovascular disease. But yeah, you can tell that this is really moving pretty well, so we're pretty happy about it. Now I'm just going to finish by talking about the long-term consequences of this. First of all, you may ask, well, okay, these therapies sound pretty interesting. Maybe it's true that they may be working fairly soon. What's it going to mean? Well, this is all guesswork. I completely acknowledge that what I'm going to tell you in the next couple of minutes is guesswork. But, you know, I can guess better than you on this, because I know a hell of a lot more than you about it. So I think that we will get about 30 years of extra life from the implementation of the therapies that we're working on right now, that we know what to do. The reason we won't get infinite life is because the therapies won't be perfect. They will work fairly well against most of the types of damage that are accumulating, and we can estimate that the amount of damage that we're going to do to damage, the amount of success that we're going to have in getting rid of damage, will be enough that we ought to be able to take 60-year-olds and rejuvenate them such that they won't be biologically 60 again until they're chronologically 90. That's a really speculative estimate, but it's the best I've got for you. So then the first question is, then what? Supposing someone is then chronologically 90, what can we do for them? Well, the thing is, they won't be exactly the same as they were when they were 60. They will have more of the types of damage that the therapies don't work on, naturally, because they won't have any of the damage that the therapies do work on. So we're going to have to invent better therapies if we want to carry on rejuvenating these people. But the thing is, we will have had 30 years to do that. That's really important, the amount of time that we will be buying for ourselves to improve these therapies. And because this classification I gave you seems very robust, seems very likely to be a truly universal classification of the types of damage, we can be fairly sure that the big surprises we're going to get, the new things we're going to have to fix, will be very similar to the things that we already fixed, and that we will therefore be able to fix them quite quickly by small modifications to the therapies that we already have. So I think that it's more or less certain, virtually certain, that we will continue to be able to stay one step ahead of the problem. That we will be able to take these people that we rejuvenated when they were 60 and re-rejuvenate them when they're 90 and biologically 60 again, so that they won't be biologically 60 for a third time until they're chronologically 150, and so on and so on. That's what I've called longevity escape velocity. And what it means is that the effect of the therapies in terms of how healthy you are physically and mentally will be exactly the same as if we had 100% perfect therapies right from the beginning. The longevity side benefit, and it is a side benefit, it's a side effect of health. We're not actually working on longevity, we're only working on health, right? The side effect will be really big. People will probably live over 1,000 simply because that's how long people would live if aging didn't happen already. The number of people who are aged, who reach their birthday, 25th birthday, the number of people who don't reach their 26th birthday is very small. It's like less than 1 in 1,000. So, you know, this is a realistic number. In fact, it's probably a pessimistic number because, of course, we're going to get better at stopping people from being hit by trucks and stopping the Earth from being hit by asteroids and so on. So this is a really big deal. You're probably then interested to understand how soon this is going to happen. How soon are we going to get this 30-year increase, essentially version 1 of these therapies? I think, and this is of course again a complete guess really, but it's a better guess than yours, I think that we're probably going to get there in about 20 or 25 years. We've got a 50% chance of that. Now I'm emphasizing how speculative that is. I think there's at least a 10% chance that we won't get there in 100 years if we just hit a bunch of problems that we haven't thought of yet. Right? But who cares? A 50% chance is perfectly good enough to be worth fighting for, right? So I've already told you all of this. Now, here, this last line that I put in red is the one that I want you to take away. This is really important. At the moment, this is a pretty hard sell. The reason I have to spend my life shortening my lifespan by flying around the world giving talks like this is because so few other people really get it yet. And the reason they don't get it is usually because they don't want to get it. They don't want to get their hopes up and then have them dashed if progress is too slow. They don't want to, they have fear of the unknown. They understand that the world is going to be very different in the future. So they don't really want to think about it. And they come up with all manner of crazy ways to avoid thinking about it. But that's going to change, and it's not going to change in 20 or 25 years. It's going to change much sooner than that. Because all that's really going to be needed is enough progress in the laboratory, in mice, for example, to convince people that, yeah, this is real. It's only a matter of time before we get that kind of progress in human beings. And I believe that that kind of progress in mice, taking middle-aged mice and rejuvenating them well enough that maybe they live a couple of years longer than they normally would, that's probably less than 10 years away. I would say it might very well be less than 6 years away, so this decade. That is when pandemonium is really going to happen, when the shit is really going to hit the fan. Everybody is going to realize that the world is about to be extremely different. And those of you who are ready for that will do better than those of you who are not. But also, those of you who get it now are in a position to make it happen sooner. Some of you may be very wealthy, and you can see me later. Some of you may be biologists, and you can see me later too, because the fact is we need many more biologists working in the relevant areas, doing the things that need to be done. But those of you who are neither of those things have plenty that you can do to help this mission. You can, for example, invite me to give a talk. You can get me on the radio or the television if you happen to be in the media. But also, whatever you are, whoever you are, you can do some kind of advocacy. You can talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues, you can get the word out. You can get people to understand that aging is a medical problem, that it's a tractable medical problem, something that we have a chance of doing something about in our lifetimes, and you can get people to care. If you can do that soon, then this is going to have a higher probability of happening, and you will be saving lives. I am one of the luckiest people in the world because I am saving a lot of lives every day. I probably saved 100,000 lives just by giving this talk, because I probably brought forward the defeat of aging by about a day. Think about that, right? 150,000 people die every day worldwide, and 2/3 of them die of aging, 100,000. So, that's what you could be doing. You could be saving, 10 lives a day, at least, right? People say this sort of thing. You'll come across this. If you start doing what I do, if you start doing advocacy, you'll get this sort of thing. Oh, where will we put all the people? Oh, how are we going to make sure that it's only for the rich? It's not only for the rich. Won't dictators live forever? Won't we all be bored? Oh, it's terribly bored not getting Alzheimer's and being able to remember everything. These are questions. If you have 2 neurons to rub together, you can figure out the answers to these questions. It's really easy, okay? And the only reason people ask them is because they're petrified of actually thinking positively about aging. So they will come up with one of these things and then instantly switch their brains off so that they don't have to think about them anymore. I'm not even going to bother giving you the answers to these. They're too easy. Go to the website if you can't work them out for yourself. What you really ought to be thinking about is these sociological considerations. The fact that nobody will be sick just because they happen to have the misfortune to have been born a long time ago. The elderly will continue to contribute wealth to society, to actually do stuff that's useful, rather than just consuming wealth. They will have energy and vibrancy and vitality to continue to actually get the most of what life has to offer, to explore new experiences, which they might not do now, so stop them getting bored. What is this so-called pensions thing, this retirement thing? Why do we pay people from the age of 65 to do nothing? Why is it? It's because we're very sorry for them. And we're very sorry for them because they're about to get very sick and die. Okay. And that's not going to be true anymore. So, and this is the most important thing. Many, many elderly people are petrified of getting sick and staying sick for a long time because they know that it's going to be bad for their kids. They're going to be a burden on their kids. And it's a very legitimate fear. Nobody wants to be a burden on somebody else. But the fact is, if we can fix that, then we fix things economically in a really big way too, because the fact is it's true. The kids of the elderly really are less productive because of looking after their parents. We're going to fix all of these things. So I'm going to stop there. This is the book that I wrote several years ago. Well, not all that many years ago actually. It's still reasonably up to date. It's not up to date because there's been no progress. I hope I've convinced you of that. The reason it's up to date is because the progress that has occurred has been very much what we predicted. So we still seem to be on the right lines. And I will stop there, and I'd love to answer lots of questions. Thanks very much. All right, go. And everyone's going to have to shout, because I'm the one with the microphone.
So, I'm wondering if you think sometimes of how changes to our environment have an impact on our health, or is everything contained by those 7 types that I'm thinking of?
All right, so the question was, how much does the environment contribute to the rate of aging? For, pollution, things like that.
Radioactivity.
Yeah, radioactivity, whatever. Now, this is an important question because most people have the wrong answer in their head. Most people think that it really matters to stay out of the way of radiation and cell phones and to eat exactly right and so on. It really doesn't. Of course there are ways to shorten your lifespan, the ways that you all know about. Don't smoke, okay? Don't get seriously overweight. Pretty bleeding obvious things. But beyond that, there's almost nothing that makes any kind of difference. The difference between having an average diet and having a diet that you've really thought about is probably a few months of your longevity, if you're lucky. People misunderstand this. The things that drive aging, the things that really cause the damage that I spoke about, are the non-negotiable things. The things that are intrinsic aspects of being alive. You know what the number one thing is? The number one thing that's worst for you, that does the most for aging? It's called breathing. Breathing is really bad for you. It's the main reason why your body creates free radicals, which cause damage to DNA and proteins and so on. And, you know, we don't have a lot of choice about breathing. Next. Someone right there?
Hi. Have you considered crowdfunding?
Have we considered crowdfunding? Okay, so this is an excellent question. Yes, we certainly have, and we are doing it a bit. But crowdfunding, as traditionally done, is really difficult for this kind of purpose, for long-range scientific research. The thing with crowdfunding is, in order to raise a significant amount of money, you really have to have a goal that excites people. And it has to be a goal that's relatively short-term. Because otherwise, you know, people don't know whether they should pay up. And this is a really long-term project, so in order to make it short-term, we have to choose a teeny tiny part of it to talk about, and the teeny tiny parts are really hard to explain why they would actually be valuable. So we've tried, but it's not been very easy. We think that probably the better way to get more mass support for this, more mass money in, is really just to talk about the overall goal a lot and to get money to come straight directly to us. But we haven't rejected crowdfunding at all. We will probably do more of it.
Right. Seriously consider being a Kickstarter. Have you considered that? IBM raised like 1.3 billion just from Kickstarter.
All right. So yeah. So there are of course occasional cases where crowdfunding has made large amounts of money. But those are cases where you're not up against any kind of ambivalence in society. No, like there's a product coming soon, and crowdfunding might do that. So I remember, for example, Mark Shuttleworth tried to create a new version of that version of Linux that they do, Debian or whatever it is, and you know they made a hell of a lot of money. But that's because it's a product that people can think about, people can visualize as happening, as being available soon. Go.
You said earlier your comment on the difference in Israel. Why is it different?
Okay, yes. So, thank you. So the question was, why is Israel different? Well, there are some ways in which I don't really think I have an answer to why Israel's different, but let me talk about how I see Israel as being different. It seems, first of all, there's a lot of understanding of the value of science. Something that came up last night when I was at the gala event that introduced the Science Day, and Mr. Netanyahu spoke, the science minister spoke. It was a big deal. You know, time and time again they were talking about things like the fact that several of your most important scientific institutes were set up even before Israel was set up, like the Technion in the 1920s and the Weizmann in the 1930s and so on. You know, so it seems that it's really built into the Jewish tradition to take these things seriously. That's very important. The second thing I think is that opportunism and improvisation is really deeply built into the Israeli psyche. It seems that you guys are really good at that, and that's nice to know. The third thing, which I think often is overlooked but it's really important, is that of course the Jewish community is global, and so Israel itself is a very small country. You know, you don't have all that much money. You certainly don't have all that much money to dedicate to medical research, but you know people who do, and let's not ignore that. It's a really important thing to bear in mind. Some of the most major philanthropists these days are Jews. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, Mark Zuckerberg, people like that. These are things not to ignore. So I think that we could be getting somewhere here. But really, the number one thing is the fact that Netanyahu and other really powerful, really influential people within the Israeli infrastructure are talking positively and without ambiguity about this problem. Yesterday in the gala event, many people were talking about longevity and celebrating it, saying longevity is a good thing. So I gave you that graph earlier on and I said, well, it's a good thing that people are living longer and not dying in infancy, but it's a bad thing that it's costing us a lot of money. Most people in other countries will focus on the bad thing, that it's costing us so much money. But in Israel there seems to be much more of a tendency to focus on the good thing. Sometimes I talk about, actually let me give another thing, I'm digressing a bit, but this is quite important. We have Alzheimer's all over the world, much more than we had before. It's a massive problem, everyone knows it's a massive problem. Why do we have Alzheimer's so much more than before? One of the biggest reasons is because we have made so much progress against heart disease. So people are not dying soon enough to avoid getting Alzheimer's, right? Now, do you think anyone actually says, oh dear, I wish we hadn't made progress against heart disease. No, they don't say that. But that's effectively what they're saying if they're saying that they're not in favour of medicine for the elderly that really works. Is that bad? Next.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. Can I ask a question?
Okay.
Yeah. I think that we are getting Alzheimer because we are losing cells. Cells are created or are developed instead of the dying cells. But when the good cells, when the new cells started to function, the tail of it is a bit shorter. That means telomerage.
All right, okay.
Telomerage is, no. The question is whether we can lower the diminishing of this tail.
All right, yeah, I understand the question. Okay,
Yeah.
so you've really got two questions there. You talked about Alzheimer's and you talked about telomere shortening. So first of all, there's no evidence that I know of that says that Alzheimer's itself is caused by telomere shortening. In general, the cells that die in Alzheimer's disease are cells that are not dividing anyway, so their telomeres are not getting shorter. There are other parts of aging which may have some... I'll come back to this. So there may be some contribution of telomere shortening to some aspects of aging, especially the aging of the immune system. But in general, there's very little. Most of the cells in the body, either they don't divide at all, or they divide occasionally if, for example, the skin cells at the bottom of the skin, fibroblasts, will divide to close a wound if you have a wound, but mostly they just sit there and do nothing. Or there are some cells which do need to divide regularly, but they make this enzyme telomerase, which compensates for telomere shortening. So they don't have this problem of telomere shortening. Sometimes we see cells like that getting shorter telomeres, but nobody has shown that they get sufficiently short telomeres to actually cause any problems. So it doesn't seem that that's a really big deal. However, what is a big deal is telomere lengthening in cancer. In cancer, cells divide a lot, and they wouldn't be able to do that if they didn't have this enzyme telomerase expressing at high levels. So we are actually trying to stop cells from making telomerase, not to make them make more. You had it.
Yeah. Isn't at least part of this what preventive medicine is doing?
Right, so great question here. Sometimes when I give this kind of talk, the title of the talk, I say that rejuvenation biotechnology is kind of the sweet spot between prevention and treatment. So, in other words, it's preventative in the sense that it's mainly going to be targeted to people who are not yet sick. But it's also treatment in the sense that it's restoring the state of the body to somehow where it was before. So it's kind of halfway between. An example of why that's an important contrast is with atherosclerosis. So I talked here about how we can get rid of the oxidized cholesterol that has accumulated. Now, if we look at what we have today in terms of preventative medicine for atherosclerosis, we've got statins. Now, what statins do, I don't know, maybe you know this, maybe some of you know it. What statins do is they inhibit the creation of normal cholesterol. And of course, as a consequence, that also inhibits the creation of oxidized cholesterol. But it's a pretty bad deal, because normal cholesterol is a really important molecule. We absolutely need it, a lot. So there's only so much statins you can take. It's obviously the wrong way to go, in theory, if you have the choice. The only reason why we have statins is because we don't have the sort of things that Sense Research Foundation is trying to develop. Next.
Yes. Cancer, you included cancer as a disease of the age, but it is the one on your list of diseases that actually seems to hit all age groups, unlike the others which are purely age-linked. How come? Is that kind of
Okay, so the question is, heart disease basically doesn't happen to young people. Type 2 diabetes basically doesn't happen to people under the age of 40 or so, and so on. Cancer is a little different. Some cancers happen in childhood. Testicular cancer is mainly hitting men in their 20s. What's going on here? It's a great question. In most cases, the answer is that these cancers are caused by very unusual mutations. The reason why most cancers happen only to the elderly is because they happen only as the result of a lot of different mutations happening in the same cell and accumulating essentially knocking out a whole bunch of parallel defenses. But there are some really weird mutations, such as what's called the Philadelphia chromosome, which can kind of sidestep all of that and do the equivalent of lots of mutations all at the same time. They're important as well, and we hope that the same kinds of therapies against other cancers would work, but yes, there are exceptions. The good news, however, is that they're really, really rare. 1% of cancers hit people under the age of 30. It's a very, maybe 2%, but really, really low. All of the common cancers are very much age-related. Yep.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, ask them one at a time.
Okay, one at a time. The first is, isn't there a risk that antibiotic resistance will kind of override the effects of what you're trying to achieve? And is it also, are there other medical...
Okay, this is a wonderful combination of a medical question and a sociological question. So the question is, won't we all die of pandemics once we've fixed aging? And you're damn right that if we are as lackadaisical, as blasé about pandemics as we currently are, then there's every chance that we'll all die of pandemics. But then the same could be said of...
What is pandemics?
Okay, a pandemic is simply a disease that spreads around the world and kills an awful lot of people. It's a really big epidemic. Sorry? Right. So yeah, I mean, the same could be said of automobile accidents. Automobile accidents kill a ridiculous number of people. But they would kill a lot more if people lived long enough to have time to be hit by a truck, right? At the moment, aging kills so many people that we don't really care very much about the number of people who die on the road. And it's the same with infections in the developed world, of course. Now, once aging goes away, everything else, by default, becomes a higher risk of death. And so, of course, we're going to care more about it. And really, I'm not kidding you here, this is the main reason why we have a real problem. At the moment, it's pitiful how little money goes into vaccine development and other ways to combat infections. The only reason why is because it's not profitable, and the only reason it's not profitable is because governments haven't made it profitable. Once we care, we will easily be able to stay one step ahead of the microbial evolutionary world.
That's good to know. My other question is about sleep. Is it important for longevity, and is lack of it hurt?
So, is sleep important? Will you live less long if you don't get enough sleep? Well, I'm probably a good example here because I don't get anything like enough sleep these days. I spend my entire life traveling around the world. I'm betting simply that I am hastening the defeat of aging by a larger amount than the amount that I'm shortening my life by not getting enough sleep. But we'll see. Sure, sleep is important. Sleep is definitely important. Just like other types of stress, stress is generally bad for you, and many of the ways in which it is bad for you are quite well understood now. You create various hormones that accelerate the accumulation of various of the types of damage I've spoken about. So yeah, definitely. Okay, I've got to answer this question that I was given on a post-it note. Is it true that 7 million people are dying from air pollution? Well, it kind of depends what you mean. I mean, I haven't a clue whether that's the right number. Air pollution is bad for you, but I think I mentioned earlier in a previous question that...
Breathing is.
Sorry? That breathing is even better. Yeah, oxygen is the worst pollutant. It's the main reason why we get free radicals. You will not live significantly longer if you eliminate all air pollution, I can tell you that. And so I've got one more question, so I've been told, so it's going to be you.
There's a notion of living life fully, because we know that it's not going to last forever. Do you think it will change, something about the lifestyle will change if we know that we have an indefinite lifestyle?
All right, so basically the question is, will we have a more boring attitude to life if we know that we have the chance to live indefinitely? Does the intensity with which we get the most out of life result simply from the fact that we know we've only got 50 years to live? Well, okay, I'm going to ask all of you a question. Think back to the first time you got laid, okay? All of you think about that. Now, ask yourself carefully what you were thinking at the time. Were you thinking, oh my God, I've got to get this person into bed right now because I've only got 50 years to live? Hands up anyone who was thinking that. Okay. Well, I think that kind of answers your question. You know, I think I've got a fair chance of making the cut and living quite a long time, and that doesn't stop me from living life to the full. I can tell you that. And furthermore, you know, we don't know that we're going to live a long time. It's all probabilities. I might get hit by a truck in 50 years or in 5 years, right? So it doesn't really make a difference. All right, guys, I'm going to be hanging around a little while, so anyone wants to come up and ask more questions, you're welcome.
I would like to thank and give another round of applause to Dr. Oubry de Grey. He came to us on his free time and volunteering, and we've made a little token of our appreciation, a little thank you for a miraculous and thought-provoking talk.
And not only that, they spelled my name right, which very often doesn't happen.
And I thank Wikipedia for that. So thank you once again, and I'll switch to Hebrew now for a quick message. תודה לכולכם שבאתם באמת, יום המדע הלאומי. ההרצאה הזאת היא גם, לא זאת ספציפית, אבל יש הרצאות שלנו גם ברחבי הארץ בעוד 6-7 מוקדים. רק שנייה. כן. כן.
קודם כל היה ממש נפלא, תודה רבה על היוזמה. אבל דבר קטן, אנחנו שכחנו טלפון סלולרי בשירותים, אולי מישהו מצא?
נאמר פה שנשכח טלפון סלולרי בשירותים, אולי מישהו מצא טלפון שהוא לא שלו, הנה שם. סוף טוב, הכל טוב. אז אני רק רוצה להגיד, אנחנו וויז, אנחנו מארגנים הרצאות ברחבי הארץ בנושאי מדע וטכנולוגיה, ובשבוע הבא יהיה בדיזי עומר מואב שהוא כלכלן מכובד מוערך ומוכר. זה יהיה ביום שלישי ולא ביום רביעי, אז אתם מוזמנים לבדוק בפייסבוק שלנו